Trying to diagnose lung disease can sometimes be like trying to figure out what happened at the scene of a crime 20 years later.
Dr. Maylon Hahn is Chief of Pulmonary Medicine in Critical Care at the University of Michigan.
And so a lot could have happened before a patient notices and they're short of breath. So by the time they get in to see the physician and we try to figure out what's going on, it can be difficult to know what the initial inciting event was. Or you could have a mix of more than one thing going on, and then you're trying to tease apart what's due to X and what's due to Y.
I think I like solving puzzles, and I like to figure things out.
Dr. Yolanda Maghetto is Director of Interstitial Lung Disease in the Advanced Lung Disease Center at Baylor University Medical Center.
Patients typically develop a cough, really gradual onset of shortness of breath on exertion, but the minor differences is what makes the diagnosis. So you need an expert who knows what to look for, just because it mimics so many different other things, and you have to know the subtleties in order to figure it out.
Our focus is studying the human lung and pulmonary fibrosis in the human, and then trying to identify therapeutics. And we're very concrete on this.
Dr. Naftali Kaminsky is Professor of Medicine and Pharmacology, as well as Chief of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine at Yale School of Medicine.
Beyond studying the human lung and doing the scientific work, we're also very much involved in clinical trials. Without the clinical trials, we will not have better therapies that we have now. So the data, the RNA profiling, the human tissue research is really accelerating drug discovery. And it's true, these drugs have side effects, but they slow down disease. Every study we looked at, patients live longer and better with the drugs we have now.
One of the things that I always reinforce with patients is no matter what they've read on the internet or what they've heard from friends or colleagues, that every single patient journey is different. There's almost always something that we can do to improve symptoms, to improve quality of life, and sometimes to even extend life. So we will take it one step at a time as sort of a physician-patient journey together.
First, take a deep breath. That's what I always tell my patients. Just take a really deep breath and settle in. Learn as much as you can about your disease and become an advocate for yourself. Anxiety is normal because you hear lots of different things.
The impact of having this disease that came out of nowhere, that you never thought about, and actually really severe, the emotional impact is big.
Pulmonary diseases, chronic pulmonary diseases, are the third leading cause of death in this country, but even more importantly, they have a singularly devastating impact on mental well-being, unlike any other diagnosis. So pulmonary diseases are unique in the way that they impact mental well-being.
Dr. Kim Gorgans is a professor at the University of Denver and a rehabilitation psychologist.
The whole of the field of higher education is working harder to do better with training, to develop people who are really sensitive about issues around disability identity, for example.
So we're making changes to residency programs, we're making changes to the way that we bill for care so that you get the care that you need. You may have to ask for it, really importantly, but you'll get it.
I find that for many of my patients, when I start talking to them about a new diagnosis like pulmonary fibrosis, it's a little bit like deer in headlights. And I think I'm talking, but their brains have probably shut down. And the second they leave my office, I know they have millions of questions. So just from that kind of emotional and social support standpoint, I think that patient support groups are incredibly important.
I think of support groups as the number one first line of mental well-being. Really importantly for patients to be hooked up with people who share their experience, but also for caregivers who can have conversations with other caregivers about what their frustrations are, the ways that their needs aren't being met.
When I talk to patients and their families, I often hear a lot about various kinds of struggles that they have at home. A lot of it actually relates to things like oxygen. Sometimes getting to pulmonary rehab or medical visits. And other times it has to do with just not understanding the disease and wanting to reach out to other patients that have the disease for more support, which is why groups like the PF Warriors are so incredibly important.
Really good support groups are proactive, they're involved, they're the voice for moving the disease drug process forward. And very often you will find people who can relate to you. I had a patient years ago who was first diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, and one day he came into the office, he was so excited. And I said, "What's up?" And he said, "Do you know, I met 3 people out there who have what I have. I don't feel like I'm alone anymore. I'm not the only person in the world who's dealing with this." And it just made his day just to know he wasn't alone. So I think support groups are invaluable, and I really encourage my patients to seek them out.
I learn from patients every single day. And for physicians, having interactions with patients, particularly in the setting of a support group, are incredibly valuable and informative for making us better doctors.
My parents were refugees. Because of my family history, I identify with the people who are basically have the hardest at life. 22 years ago, I met this community of patients, but there was nothing for them. Pulmonary fibrosis was, people didn't know what the disease was. There was no real standard of care. Sometimes there were no dedicated clinics. There were no support groups. There were no drugs. So in some ways, I got really inspired by the feeling that here I'm bringing a disease that is underappreciated into the focus. What keeps me being inspired is actually this interaction with patients, with families, with advocates, because many of them, they become a part of your life, and it's really good to see them, you becoming a part of their lives in a good way.
These are some of the most wonderful patients I've ever dealt with in my entire life. They're very patient, very grateful. It was really fun in a way to work with them, and it's something I've come to love in my day-to-day existence, not just figuring out the disease, but also dealing with the people who have it.
Everything we looked at research suggests that this is a disease we will be able to stop. The fact that everything we looked in the lungs suggests that this is not like a dead sack of tissue or concrete, just scar tissue. It's actually a very active process, and we'll be able to inhibit some of these things and stop the disease, I think, is the most hopeful thing.
One of the exciting things about pulmonary fibrosis is that right now it is a very intense area of research, both on the parts of physician scientists like myself, but also pharmaceutical companies that are working with physician scientists to try to develop new and better treatments. If someone's listening to this and they've just gotten a recent diagnosis, you can be reassured that not only are there medications available to treat you now, but I'm certain that there will be more and more treatments that come available as the years go by.